On today's episode of the Leadership Puzzle, I am excited to introduce someone who I believe truly embodies what it means to lead with both strategy and heart. Deb Hill has built an impressive career as an HR leader, most recently as VP of HR for FM, where she helped scale the company through rapid growth and a successful acquisition by Johnson Controls. What really stands out about Deb is her people first approach. She's not just about driving outcomes. She's done plenty of that, though. She's about creating environments where people can thrive. From transforming employee engagement to leading M&A integrations without losing key talent. Deb brings us a unique mix of operational savvy and genuine care for her teams. I'm really looking forward to diving into her insights on leadership, employee engagement, and building cultures that last. Deb, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Leadership Puzzle.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's great. Great to have you. You know, we both have similar passions around a particular people-related topic. So we're going to dive into that for the next little bit. But the first one we'll dive into is culture. Now, how do you look at culture and what importance do you place on the value of establishing a good culture, whether that's a good or bad culture?
Yeah, for sure. Great question, Jeff. So for me, I think, culture really can make or break an organization. So clearly I place a high value on culture. And culture to me is really, it's the norms under which it's the norms under which employees operate within a company, right? Oftentimes people want to tie culture to kind of all of the perks that you offer within a company. And that might be a little part of it, but it's more about how does an employee work in the company? What are the norms that are established based upon our values? So it's not just the values, but how do employees live those values? How do leaders live those values within the company, right? Is it okay to, to knock on the CEO's door? Are leaders looking for consistent, regular feedback from employees? Is it okay to ask questions? Is it okay to fail as long as I'm learning something from that failure?
Right.
So, I think companies with really strong cultures are able to attract talent and retain that talent at a much greater rate than companies that maybe have a toxic culture, right? Have leaders that sort of create this toxic culture. And, you see that on Glassdoor. You see that in exit interviews and engagement surveys, et cetera.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point around how are the leaders and the managers living that culture. I actually saw a study recently where culture plays a bigger part in someone's sticking around than even the manager, right? I mean, we've all heard people leave managers, they don't leave companies. Well, that's not entirely true. I've seen companies with amazing cultures acquire sizable organizations. They put new leaders in place, and the culture just crumbles. And that, I've actually lived through that, so that's no fun.
Right. Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, culture is a really difficult thing to kind of measure and quantify. But when you've been part of an organization where you felt that, and culture has been so key to kind of your own personal success and the company's success, when you become part of an organization where culture is just less valued,
Yeah.
I do think that even if you've got a great relationship with your manager, with your leader, um, it's hard to operate in an environment where maybe your values don't align, or you know, um, you're just not, you know, your opinions, don't matter maybe as
Yeah.
much within, XYZ company.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly anytime that you're acquiring a company or being acquired, that's a whole um, different scenario. Um,
Hmm.
but you've been with companies of different sizes, smaller and larger. So in your experience, how do you help create and maintain a strong company culture, especially if there is
Hmm.
a rapid growth or
Hmm.
major transition or
Yep.
even acquisition? I mean, because that's the thing that I think a lot of employees come in and they get scared when they start hearing the M&A terminology. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? A lot of them think, oh, well, I have my job, but there's this more insidious issue of what if the culture changes? And
Hmm.
even if you
Hmm.
have keep your job, the company's not the same anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, so at my most recent role at FM Systems, I had the opportunity to kind of drive that culture, transformation as we acquired companies, right? So when I started with the company, we had 70 employees, and then we made a small snap-on acquisition. And so when you think about making a small acquisition like that, you're still acquiring a company that has its sort of individual culture,
Yeah.
and you kind of expect that they're going to assimilate into your own culture, but the best way to sort of go about doing that is really like identifying someone in the organization that you're acquiring that can kind of be a culture champion,
Uh,
right?
sure.
And then also looking to say, okay, well, where are we similar? So tying in the similarities in culture versus focusing on what's different, and kind of trying to build a bridge there as you bring those individuals into the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we also did an acquisition that pretty much, doubled the size of the company, and really the acquired kind of carve out was a little bit larger than the company we were. And so that was interesting because you truly had sort of two, pretty different cultures that we
Oh yeah.
had to bring together. But again, in my experience, what's most important is communication, right? So regular communication, really listening as well to what the other side has to say, listening to like why was their culture important? What was key in their culture? And then again, kind of bridging those gaps to bring the two organizations together. But it's not quick work.
Yeah.
It's not going to, that merging of cultures is not going to happen overnight. And it's something that you have to continue to talk about and keep an eye on. And ultimately, leadership has to, and when I say leadership, I mean the CEO, the executive team has to buy into the idea that culture is important within the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. Now, in a scenario where you have two equal size organizations, I mean, unless it's a merger, I mean,
Hmm.
most of them, you have an acquirer and an acquiree, if you will. Um, have you been in a scenario where instead of trying to uh, push the existing culture into the acquired company, which can be a monumental task, or did you actually go in and facilitate the creation of a new joint culture?
That's a great question. So, and I wish I could say that I was, that I did the kind of facilitation of sort of a joint culture. But we really kept our values, like we kept our values, we kept our mission the same. I think, the one piece that did sort of change and merge a little bit was our commitment to a remote first
Mm.
work environment. So the company, the carve out that we had acquired had a pretty significant amount of remote employees. We had primarily been a on-site, 5 days a week company. So we really had to, we couldn't continue to be that 5 days a week in office company,
Yeah.
given that over, close to half of our organization was, was used to kind of fully remote.
Right.
So we had to kind of bridge those two cultures into, you know, hybrid, and eventually we became a remote first company.
So in that scenario, you adjusted your culture, even though you probably kept the core, some of the elements you adjusted to adapt to the company because they were bringing so many employees in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I was I had I was the lead integrator of a scenario where two companies came together and they're both, fairly sizable.
Hmm.
And the the on the surface, the cultures seemed really, really the same. But they were not
They
really.
were. Hmm.
And when, sitting down with the acquired company, understood that a lot of people weren't necessarily happy with the culture of the acquired company. So, um, but the thought was, well, let's get the new executive team together to create something that was going to be better than as uh, better than just the kind of mushing together of the two.
Hmm.
And I think we did that, and
Hmm.
it was a lot of fun. Not only did we do a name change, but we did a values change, a culture change, a
Wow.
mission change,
Yeah.
and
Nice.
and I mean that was super exciting to do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then, as you said, that communication was so important to have to just almost pound it into employees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and if you think about, again, if you think about what culture is, which is it's how do, how do you go about the day-to-day business of operating as a company? If you think about kind of changing that or shifting that, you know, it's just such a huge change, that communication is so important.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's right. Um, so it also reminds me of a time when I was in uh, uh, when I was at Kimberly Clark, and I moved over to Moscow, Russia, to lead the HR organization there. And it was really fascinating to me, and I want to get your take on this. Um, we would hire from the other FMCG companies in Moscow. So big competitors, Procter and Gamble, Unilever, some of the big Russian grocery chains. They each had their own unique culture, and what was fascinating is we'd bring in these employees, and they would kind of set up these like mini camps. I mean, almost like, going to New York City and you have little Italy and Chinatown and the Greek Village and whatnot. You had the little P&G culture, the
Yeah.
Unilever
Hmm.
culture,
Hmm.
and so I was brought over to help kind of create a Kimberly Clark
Okay.
culture.
Yep. Hmm.
Um, and some of the things that I did was training, meetings,
Hmm.
recognition, feedback,
Hmm. Hmm.
building it into performance
Hmm. Hmm.
process.
Hmm.
What about you? What are some of the tips and tricks that you've used in helping to either create or strengthen the culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, a number of things. And to your point, you really have to embed it into kind of every piece of the employee life cycle. So, from the first moment of recruiting candidates, talking about how we live our values, what our core values are, and how those show up within culture, within the organization, and even, asking questions, interviewing based upon, some of those core values. And then when you think about onboarding, like, we had a pretty robust onboarding platform uh, where, our CEO would talk about kind of what our culture was. And so the kind of the first message that new employees, when they're coming into the company, they're hearing about culture, they're hearing about values. Um, and then, it's embedded within their onboarding program, right?
Yeah.
And leaders are talking about culture with employees during their one-on-ones, right? Um, I think, it's just there's a variety of ways that you can embed culture within an organization, but it really takes um, kind of like you have to do it consistently. And again, uh, a there has to be leadership buy-in, right? There has to be CEO buy-in to building those things within the organization.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just putting posters up on a wall doesn't cut it, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, we even went so far as to, we created a recognition program that was aligned to our culture. I mean, it was aligned to our values. So, it was a program where individual employees could, nominate their coworkers for living the values, right? So, which was, acting with urgency, taking accountability. And so we had little awards that we would do, fun recognition awards that we would do during our happy hour, or happy news, happy hours. Uh,
I like
and
that.
it was
Happy
really
news, happy
fun.
hours.
Yeah, happy news, happy hour. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's those little things that can make a big difference. We'll get into the employee engagement piece, but to
Mm-hmm.
really solidify, excuse me, solidify that culture. Now, when a company is growing,
Mm-hmm.
or gosh, even if a company has stagnated or uh, having some difficult times, the culture can suffer uh, on both
For
sides
sure.
of that
Mm-hmm.
spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any early warning signs that you've noticed? Having led HR teams and been in that executive room that might be touch points where our listeners, you can say, hey, if you're seeing this, it
Yep.
might be indicative that you got a culture issue.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that there are a couple of things that you can be on the lookout for. and I'm going to tie it into employee engagement, which I know is our next, topic. But if you're doing regular employee engagement surveys and you're seeing engagement start to drop versus maintain or increase, there could be, some issues with company culture. Are you seeing increased turnover in any particular area? Are there breakdowns in communication? So, are, you know, are teams not getting the information they need from other teams within the organization? Is there kind of an increased effect of employees being siloed within the organization? And is there like a lack of enthusiasm when it comes to a few regular company meetings? Are you noticing that fewer employees are engaging in those meetings, making comments, asking questions, right? I think, and then on an individual manager, leader to employee basis, if you're having regular, consistent one-on-ones with your employees, that's something that you can, I think, really sense up front as you're, I don't know. Do you have employees who at one point in time had their camera on all the time, were showing up really energized and engaged, and all of a sudden, you know what, they're off camera a lot, and you're having conversations where you're just not hearing the same level of enthusiasm in their voice?
No, I think that's those are good warning signs. I also think there's some things that I've seen is where maybe maybe deliverables are getting
For
missed
sure.
or they slip, right? So that work product, whatever that is slipping. And part of the hardest time to see some of that is when there's a lot of growth, because if you've got a whole lot of growth, some of those underlying cultural issues can be masked by success in one part of the
For
business.
sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you think about kind of that, that rapid growth, I think with rapid growth comes rapid growth in employee numbers. And so you think about kind of having to, a new employee in multiples is not familiar with your culture. And maybe you're hiring new managers and new managers are not familiar with your culture. So kind of, you've got this issue of how do I ramp up, like how do I get all of these new people aligned with our culture at the same time that we're growing exponentially?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually remember when I was at Intel and in the 90s. I just dated myself, but it had probably the strongest culture that I'd ever worked in. I mean, no matter where I went in the world, I mean, people lived and breathed the culture and the values of the company. But we grew so fast. So when I joined, it was 20,000 employees, and gosh, over 5, 6 years, it grew to 30, 40,000. And the CEO realized, oh, we really need to get back to basics. And so that was like, oh, that's always stuck to me. Hey, we need to get to a back to basics campaign to who we are, culture,
Yes.
values, and whatnot. So get everyone to move back to those core things. So you brought up the fact that we've been dancing around the 1-2 kind of dancing partner of culture, and that's employee engagement.
Yes.
So having a strong culture helps, but engagement also goes a long way in building that strong culture. You've led a lot of employee engagement initiatives. You've touched base on a couple of those. What are some of those strategies that you feel have been the most impactful as you've gone to, try and engage the employee base?
Yeah. So, I think it all starts with, look, it all starts with listening. So, it, you can't change what you're not measuring. So with employee engagement, it's just so critical to, at least in my opinion, it's so critical to have a employee engagement survey platform that you know, like, that's easy to use, that's measurable, that you can consistently kind of measure your progress. So I'm most familiar with the Gallup Q12 survey. And why I liked using that was, again, easy to use. An employee can answer 12 questions fairly quickly. And it's really easy to explain to employees. It's kind of scientifically tied to what makes an engaged
Hmm.
employee. And so, so it's using those engagement surveys on a regular basis. We chose to do it every 6 months. But
Okay.
then, more important than the measuring is, like, what do you do with that data? Um, you know, so it's, what do you do with the data? We committed to, across the organization, what are the, two bottom most, like, what are the two answers that we scored the lowest on? And what actions can we take to help improve employee engagement in those areas? And we would do that on a consistent basis, and we'd communicate it to the organization so that employees clearly knew what our score was, um, where we were low, where we were high, and the actions that we were taking, to improve that
Yeah.
employee engagement, right? And that was, it was communicated not just from me, from the head of HR, but it was communicated, from our CEO, on his regular town hall meetings, kind of how important employee engagement was within our organization. So some of the strategies that we came up with post engagement surveys, we did things like, improving employee communication by adding more regular, town halls, on a monthly, basis. And, another thing we did is we redesigned our employee performance process so that it was more of a focus on, monthly, like these
Mm,
monthly communications.
nice.
So, designed to really drive the, connection between the manager and the employee, because the more kind of connected the employee is to the manager, the more they feel part of the organization. And that again sort of drives engagement. So every month, a manager would talk with the employee about things like, it could be one month, it might be, um, uh, their mental health and
Mm,
well-being. Another month, it might be, talking about core competencies. Another month, it might be talking about values and how, goals according to values. But again, kind of all designed to kind of create, a stronger connection, especially when you're working in a virtual remote first
oh, yeah.
environment. It's that connection that really drives employee engagement. Um, so those are just, some of the things. I mean, we did a whole host of things, over a 2-year period, at, FM Systems, especially coming out of COVID. We really made a company-wide effort to increase our employee engagement, skills and or not skills, employee engagement scores. And because we felt that it had a direct impact on the business, and we were able to increase those scores over 2 years by 20 basis points within
Wow.
Gallup, which was, I think, pretty amazing.
You brought something up, and I think it's something that is really on a lot of our listeners' minds around how do you engage that remote workforce. So if you've learned how to improve that employee engagement survey score,
Hmm.
like real improvement, not just, hey guys, fill it out and give us a good
Yes,
number, which I've
yes,
seen.
yes.
I've had
Hmm.
managers do,
Hmm.
but like real systematic engagement activities of a remote workforce.
Hmm.
What are some tips and ideas that our audience could walk away with?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we really emphasized was the daily stand-up meeting, right? So, I mean, I used it with my team. Our CEO used it with his team, and many of my peers use it with their team. So it's like it's a 15-minute stand-up call with the members of your team, and it's
Right.
really just a round robin of like, hey, here's my top priorities for the day. Um, Here's things I might need, if there's any blockers that I need removing, here's what it is, right? But it also, in a remote environment, it might sound a little, I don't know, to some people, it might sound a little micromanagey, but it's really not, right?
Hmm.
Like, trust me, it's, you know, every day you have an opportunity then to see your teammates
Right.
and connect.
Yep.
And sometimes it's, maybe we don't have a lot to say, but it might be more personal than work. But again, it's creating connection. It's
Yeah.
creating those connections every single day, which when you're working remotely, I think, it's easy to sort of feel like you're on an island and maybe not part of a team. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
stand up kind of helps with the team. And then the other thing that we did something called Take 15.
Hmm.
So Take 15 was something that it was, it wasn't mandatory. So, but every other Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern, it was like a fun sort of, hey, we're all going to gather for um, you know, similar to like if you're in the office and you're going to gather for a coffee chat or something like that. But it
Yeah.
was, right, it was like, we did music trivia one week, we did movie trivia another week. We do introduction of teams. So various teams would kind of get together and answer these fun sort of personal questions on a video, and so
Nice.
again, it was a way to connect
Yeah.
within that remote work
Yeah.
environment.
It's really interesting, Deb, because if you've worked in a global company, there's always been a remote element of having remote managers potentially and whatnot. Um, but before video, it was mostly phone. So we'd had these teleconferences that everyone would get on.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
and then WebEx kind of came on, and if
Yep.
you were fortunate enough to have WebEx, that was so cool because you could see
Yep.
your
Absolutely.
employee from across the globe. And I was like, well, how come it's different now? And it dawned on me that the remote that we have now is because people are working from home or working from a location that is not with a bunch of other people from the company.
Right.
And so that isolation can play a significant part in the engagement of the
Absolutely.
employee.
Absolutely. Yes. 100%. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that if you don't, I mean, just think about if you're a new employee and you're starting in a remote environment, you don't have you have no context at all about who people are within the organization, who I should connect with. I can't get pulled into, I'm not just, I can't meet people in the lunchroom, right? Like it's just, um, I think yes, that it can be very
Yeah.
isolating
Yeah.
for employees.
Yeah. Now, I know I know there's a lot of studies and every consultant out there will go, oh, employee engagement is so important, and CEOs and CHROs will say employee engagement is so important. It's talked about all the time, but it's not always prioritized.
Mhm.
So, how did you go about making sure that your leadership not only bought in, but actually remained committed to building and that engaged workforce and ensure that it's not just a buzzword? Yeah, fill out the survey and we'll get back to you in 6 weeks, kind of a thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, look, I think in some aspects it was, I don't want to say it was easy, but again, with, I was fortunate in the fact that I had a CEO who was very much committed to employee engagement, right? Like he truly had read all the reports and had an understanding that engaged workforces drive better business results. Um, but of course, he's got a variety of competing priorities. And so, like, it does still take a consistent, consistently talking about employee engagement at the leadership level. And so, in order to do that, you got to make sure that HR has a seat at the, HR is actually reporting into the C-suite, is part of those ongoing leadership conversations.
Yeah.
um, we also, when we measured employee engagement, we didn't just do it across the organization. We did it by leadership teams and we shared those results, right? So those results were very visible. You did not want to be you didn't really want to be the executive who had the lowest engagement
Yeah. Yeah.
scores, right? Where there were questions. Um, being asked. And so I think, you've got to drive that accountability at the leadership level to, again, doing the actions that are necessary to improve that employee engagement within, not just within the organization, but within the teams that fall below you.
Yeah. I've seen some studies that, as employee engagement goes up, revenue goes up or
Hmm.
operating
Hmm.
profit. So, you mentioned you saw a 20% increase in engagement over a couple year period. Without giving any numbers, can you say definitively that during that same time you saw the financial metrics, whether it's revenue or EBITDA or cash flow, did they also improve?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely 100%, right? And you think about that 2 year time period, it was the 2 year time period kind of also leading up to our
Mm,
exit, right? And so it was, improved improving financial conditions. It was improving retention, employee retention numbers. It was, we retained close to 100% of our kind of top, kind of,
nice.
call them key leaders, right? So
Yep.
the key leaders that we really needed to keep in place as we're moving towards an exit. We retained that talent
Right.
over that 2 years as we were increasing engagement, as we were kind of moving towards, what was sort of a known, I mean, it's a known strategy in the PE world that eventually, you're moving towards this exit.
No, that's great. All right, we're running out of time, so I have one final
Okay.
question. We talked about early warning signs on the culture. What about
Yeah.
employee engagement? Are there any early warning signs that leaders should be on the lookout for when employee engagement is suffering, without doing surveys? Because not everybody pays attention to surveys or does them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's again, it's similar to the culture answer. So it's, looking for changes in employee behavior.
Right.
So are there fewer employees joining your all hands
Yeah.
meetings?
Right.
Is there, are they quieter? Is there less collaboration?
Sure.
And potentially too, like, do you have higher turnover? Like, is your turnover starting to tick
Mhm.
up? Are you starting to miss deadlines and miss targets?
Right.
Kind of all of those things can be early warning signs that you have an employee engagement problem. And it can also come out in, if you're doing, I guess if you're doing exit surveys, it may come out in exit surveys too, as employees are leaving the
Sure.
organization.
Okay. No, those are great. I always, uh, when we were in, full time in the office, I always
Mhm.
loved the concept of MBWA, right? Management by walking around. I
Yeah.
know you're a little bit young to really know that acronym, but it really is a forgotten art. And now, especially now that we're in a
Yes.
remote
Mhm.
environment, and so the idea is that you quickly pop into someone's office. Now it's a Zoom or gosh, a Teams chat or a WhatsApp chat. Just to pop in that says, hey, how you doing? How are
Yeah.
things going?
Yes.
And that's a way that I always found was a good way to keep a pulse on at least your employees.
For sure. Yeah. Yes.
Uh,
If you're a leader in a remote environment and you're not regularly checking in, talking to your employees, that's a problem.
yeah, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
That's a big
hmm
problem.
Yep.
Well, Deb, this has been just so much fun chatting with you about culture and engagement. Thank you so much for coming on the Leadership Puzzle.
Absolutely, Jeff. Really had a great time. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming and listening to Deb and I talk about culture and engagement. Be sure to like and share and comment below, and stay tuned for the next Leadership Puzzle.